Hey, this is Amanda, women's health dietitian.
And I'm Emily, nutritional therapy practitioner.
And this is the Are You Menstrual podcast, where we help you navigate the confusing world of women's hormones and teach you how to have healthy periods.
Each week, we will be diving into a different topic on women's health and sharing our perspective using nutrition, female physiology, and metabolic health.
Our goal is to help you wade through conflicting health information and empower you on your healing journey.
We hope you enjoy it.
In this episode, we are talking about how to rewire your brain and support your body during the healing journey with Theresa Piela. Theresa is the founder of Living Roots Wellness, a colon hydrotherapist by training. She works as an independent health researcher and brain rewiring coach. Theresa holds space for one-on-one group coaching and hosts a brain rewiring membership that I've heard really great things about, emphasizing brain rewiring and EFT tapping for those with complex histories of gut-brain trauma disorders. She focuses on supporting the most complicated cases of chronic illness that may have lost hope and the ability to connect to joy as a result of their illnesses. With pro-metabolic nutrition, learning to truly embody safety at the level of the nervous system and release inherited and stored trauma, she empowers her clients with simple tools to reclaim their elegance, confidence, and strength, and to ultimately heal themselves. Thank you so much for being here, Theresa.
Thanks for having me, Amanda. I've been so excited for this.
So why don't we just start right off with, what is your story? How does someone get into brain rewiring and like EFT tapping, especially coming from that background of colon hydrotherapy?
Yeah, I think like a lot of your listeners, a lot of your clients, I didn't even really know I was so sick until it was almost too late. And my story starts very early. And I think research is really beginning to show the impact of the mother's health on the developing fetus and then the child. But even further back, the impact of generations before us completely changes the way we come into the world. And so what was showing up for me was as early as second grade, I just felt off. I had a pretty distended stomach. I always felt tired. I always felt really sad. I felt very removed from the other kids, like as if I were in this gray bubble. And at the time, I didn't have the understanding, the language, anything to really place myself in what was happening. And it kind of grew and intensified as the years went on. I just thought it was normal. I just thought, oh, okay, this is how I am. Maybe other people feel this way. And I had maybe a little bit of evidence showing that some people just felt different. Okay, not a problem. We have diverse experiences. But it kind of snowballed in my adolescent years. And the classic Western approach, again, is to kind of medicate and treat symptoms. So as early as seventh grade, I was put on Prilosec to deal with my acid reflux. I was given a bunch of antibiotics for all the ear infections I was having. I was eating pretty terribly because, again, I had no awareness of the importance of food. And as a young adolescent, it's just not something you really think about in terms of a long-term approach. And from there, I just continued to go downhill and started developing even more intense symptoms of just fatigue, joint pain, panic attacks, just feeling completely unwell. So again, the approach was, give her some Prozac, give her some antidepressants, put her on birth control. It's good for her bones, all these things that I blindly accepted. So that was the first phase of thinking, okay, I'm going to feel better. This is going to be leading me where I want to go. It was not the quick fix that I had hoped. And it only left me feeling more out of body, more sickly, more overwhelmed. And it was my junior year in college, actually, where I feel like it was a very pivotal time in terms of getting my first diagnosis of Lyme and a bunch of co-infections. And it felt like, yes, finally, I had an answer. This is why I've been so sick my entire life. It's like, okay, they can fix me. Awesome. As a lot of people can probably relate, that took my pretty dismal health and basically destroyed it even more. I was put on massive doses of antibiotics for about 7 months. I was getting injections of antibiotics. I had basically a binder of supplements, a lot of toxic supplements that I now would never recommend to anyone I love. The classic fish oil, zinc, glutathione, iron, one thing they did right was put me on a thyroid supplement. So I can thank my doctors for that. But that kind of opened up this world of getting testing and diagnoses and trying to find answers that started to feel extremely overwhelming, because what first was just, oh, Lyme and co-infections, then turned out to be, oh, wow, you have severe osteoporosis and you're 20 years old. Oh, you have extremely high levels of lead and mercury and thallium and cadmium. Oh, why is there toxic mold in your pee? All of these things that just felt completely out of place. It didn't feel like there was any rhyme or reason. It made sense given how awful I felt, but it didn't give me a clear way out. And backing up from this picture for a moment, a lot of the recommendations that the doctors would give me, I would do right away because I wanted to feel better. So the first thing was a low carb, sugar-free, dairy-free, gluten-free diet, which is kind of like a modified autoimmune paleo approach, like really heavy on the nuts, really heavy on the proteins, 7 cups of vegetables, everything that, okay, looks beautiful on a plate, but when someone's gut is already pretty ravaged and dysfunctional, it's like maybe the last thing you want to do to someone. So yeah, it was basically like a downward spiral into more and more levels of dysfunction. And I was losing basic ability to function. I was so brain fogged, so panicked, just, someone you probably wouldn't want to be around. I think one of the biggest symptoms for me was I so badly wanted to heal and was willing to do whatever it took. So that led me into starting to do some self-exploration in terms of, okay, what are some other options aside from what the doctors are giving me, aside from what the Western model is giving me? But even with the naturopaths and the more of the even Chinese medicine doctors and acupuncturists and shamanic healers, even with their protocols, I wasn't getting better. And I started to notice that everything I was thinking, as I was telling you before, every thought that would pass through my head was just panic, despair. I didn't believe I could heal. I didn't want to stay alive. I didn't see any point in staying alive, just given how dysfunctional my body was. And I've mentioned to you probably in the past, but one of the symptoms after the heavy doses of antibiotics for Lyme's disease was I had lost all gut motility. And some people call it gastroparesis, but what we're understanding now is that the Lyme infection can actually damage the vagus nerve. And basically, even if you're doing everything right, the gut loses the ability to have the normal contractions and the normal peristalsis. So whatever you put in stays. And that was probably the worst of it, because if anyone hasn't had a bowel movement for like 3 days, you probably know how uncomfortable that feels. I would go about 5 to 7-ish days with nothing. And that's when I started to realize, okay, I have to do enemas at home. And that opened up my interest into colon hydrotherapy and really seeing this as such a helpful tool. But long story short, it was when I finally started stepping away from doctors and healers and the idea that someone else was going to fix me, and started to check in with myself and realize, okay, if I don't want to be here, if I don't believe that I can heal, that's on me. It feels like a dark night of the soul, if you know that phrase. It's like when everything has fallen apart. And literally, I was 79 pounds. I looked like ET. I was terrified of my body. I saw no future for anything. And yet I had a beautiful partner who's now my husband, and something about having his company and his reflection that, okay, we're going to do this together. It's like that planted a little seed of hope where I started to realize, well, wait a second. What if I believe I can heal? If both stories are, if we're making up both stories anyways of I'm going to be sick and I'm going to die very young, or maybe I can heal. I've seen other people do it. I've heard amazing stories of people overcoming Lyme and cancer and all sorts of pretty intense diseases. So that opened up this beautiful box of starting to change the brain. And that really informed a lot of the research into trauma and just rewiring the nervous system, supporting the vagus nerve, and really understanding more about how the nervous system and that feeling of safety impacts every physiological process in the body. So while diet is an important piece for so many people, if they're still stuck in the fight or flight and panic mode, even the best, most beautiful, mineral-rich diet is not going to be as healing as it could be if we start to really change the brain and allow the body to start to say, okay, well, even though I don't think I can heal, what if I at least focus on the fact that I'm still here? My body's still keeping me alive. My heart's still pumping, and really, really opening up like a gentle one step forward at a time, because there's a lot of ideas right now about like how people manifest diseases, and like you just have to think your way out of it. You have to manifest the vitality and the life that you dream of, which I'm not a fan of because it puts a lot of guilt and shame on people that are truly very sick. But I am a fan of learning to take responsibility for your thoughts, because as we've talked about before, your body wants to heal. And part of that schism that I see so often, that I saw in myself, is that we forget that the body is desperate and begging to be healthy, and we shame it, we torture it, we criticize it, we create all sorts of stories about how it's not good enough, how it's not trying hard enough. And that's a big piece of this too. So I'll leave it there because I could go in 30,000 directions. But
I mean, think about it. Like, I didn't realize it started for you so young. Like, that's a lot to recap. Second grade, like, it's,
yeah, thank you.
you know, that's a good chunk. I'm still so caught in the fact that you were on Prilosec so young.
Oh my gosh.
It just like, I feel like that would stand out to anyone. Like, even if you had family members on medication, as being like, this is kind of weird. You know, like this is probably not good.
Yeah. And the recurrent ear infections as well. I'm thinking anyone should have seen that as a sign, something's not right. So maybe these days people are a little bit more informed with the microbiome and, you know, just thinking about the gut ear axis and what might be going on there. But I'm sure we have all sorts of listeners. So this is not to make anyone change their mind about anything, but it really made me question the Western medical model, because I'm just like, wait a second, looking back, I'm like, is that really the solution?
It's the solution if it works, and then until it doesn't, and then they're kind of like, well, we don't know what else to do with you. And I think that's the frustrating part. If someone has an ear infection, they take an antibiotic, it goes away. That's amazing. That's great. But if it doesn't and it keeps coming back, you know, my nephew had the same issue, like recurrent ear infections. And I'm like, we can't keep giving him antibiotics. I act like it's my choice. I'm always like sharing advice with my sister and stuff, because I would, just like she does with me. And I was like, we got to try something else, because it doesn't mean he can never take another antibiotic again. But I'm like, this kid's 2 and he's been on 4 rounds of antibiotics already, and he still is getting these. And it's scary because you want to do the best for your child, for yourself. You're scared for the situation. And I guarantee that's what your parents were thinking, that it's like, you're just doing the best you can with what you have. And it's so interesting. You were still really young in college and getting that Lyme diagnosis. That's heavy. That's a lot to be like, my health is falling apart. I'm super young. I shouldn't be feeling this way. So I can totally see how that spiraled out to everything that it did.
The restrictive diets, I think, was a piece of rewiring my brain towards panic, towards doom, because not only did I start to become so fearful of foods or messing up or not healing, I actually started to become fearful of having symptoms from meals, because a lot of the foods I was eating to heal actually made me feel awful, you know, like very extreme flu-like symptoms that compounded over the years. And the more I just had food sitting in me and didn't even realize that was a problem. You know, I didn't know that if you're not having multiple bowel movements a day, you're constipated. You're reabsorbing that through the gut lining. Now I know better. But at the time, it was just this cycle of panic, 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 scared to go out, scared to travel. So I'd be at home eating my perfectly prepared, you know, GAPS meal, but feeling like I could just lay down and just be in comatose position after a meal. So, the things we learn.
I know. And it is hard. And anyone listening that they've had a lot of food fears developed from restrictive diets, a lot of it does come from like not wanting to do the wrong thing. Like they're trying to follow the list, the recommendation given to them by their doctor, who probably had great intentions. It's when we're always looking for information outside of ourselves and then never listening to what's happening in our bodies that it creates this huge disconnect that can make it really hard to heal.
Yes. And I think as a result, the body learns to not feel safe because it doesn't know how to trust itself. For an example, like even just eating a restrictive GAPS diet, like they start you off with just broth, ghee, and I think a few different types of vegetables. It's so restrictive. Oh, and meat. And say you keep forcing yourself to eat that, coming from that really good place of, I want to feel better. I'm going to do whatever it takes. It's almost like we forget to even take in the signals that the body's like, this doesn't feel right. This is not working for me. So part of healing from that is learning that you actually did know what you needed all along, and that everyone's always going to be presenting ideas, but learning to honor that there is that little voice that it has this pull towards certain things. And there's a reason why when maybe a doctor or a coach gives you a protocol and all of a sudden it feels like intensely overwhelming and so stressful, that's something to listen to, because the stress response is so closely tied with that intuition, with the vagus nerve telling you that maybe this isn't the way. And I think if for a lot of people, honoring that could be a piece of the puzzle for you, because if something is causing more stress, it's counterproductive, basically preventing the body's innate ability to heal.
That's a perfect way to put it. It just literally preventing your body from actually healing, but it can be hard because you're trying to do the right thing. One thing that you said at like the very end of telling your story is how you kind of came to this place where you recognize your thoughts and how, oh, if I like just kind of start making some small changes here and there, like I think this could actually help me. Is that like what you mean when you're talking about rewiring the brain? Like, what does this phrase mean?
Yeah, so great question. I think it really starts with the awareness of starting to look at the chatter in your brain. And for a lot of people, there might even be a disconnect there, because in a way, life requires us to kind of ignore mind over matter, or we do certain things and we're not even realizing what we're doing. And an example of this would be we almost expect ourselves to feel awful. Say we've been feeling sick for a while. The brain will start to imagine like, oh, I'm going to feel so tired when I wake up, and I'm going to feel so panicked, and then I'll eat that certain food and I'll feel absolutely miserable, and I absolutely cannot work out because I'll feel exhausted afterwards. And stories like that, where again, we don't even realize what's happening until we really start to look at that and even start to question, wow, is that true? Is this helping me? How did this even start? And starting to play around with that. But yeah, I think it starts with that awareness, and then starting to really ask yourself, okay, well, how would I like to feel about this situation? Am I adding suffering to this situation? Is this helping me at all? So that, I mean, brain rewiring could look so different for a lot of people, but it's really just noticing, okay, what's the programming I'm running on? How did this develop? That's a piece of it, but not necessary. And what's the new framework I'd like to think about? And it helps to look at this from different perspectives. I think it's really helpful to even look back on your life, because that was a big part for me, realizing life felt so finite. Like it truly felt that I was so close to death when I had just reached a point of such extreme dysfunction and extreme sickness. And it was starting to even see that as, wow, if this is my last year on this earth, how do I want to be moving through that? So that can open up a doorway, because in a way, it's obvious that you'd want to enjoy it. You'd want to remember something beautiful, even if you're feeling sick. What else is there? Thinking outside of the body, because, that's a piece of it too. We become so hypervigilant, scanning for bloating, pain, discomfort. If we have pretty intense gut issues, teaching the brain, okay, yes, you've mastered the art of self body scanning. What else is there? So part of my personal process was starting to look outwards and distracting in a healthy way, but distracting from body scanning and starting to look outside. And I would literally watch the birds. I started watching the crows where we were living at the time. And I would get these little gaps of noticing that I wasn't stuck in the panic mode. I wasn't thinking about the next treatment option. I wasn't thinking about how uncomfortable my body felt. And it was almost teaching the brain that, oh, wow, there are other things to think about. And there's a lovely idea. I'm forgetting the name of the psychologist, but basically what you put your attention on is what your experience is, which is so true and easier said than done. So that's why the term brain retraining makes a lot of sense, because it is an active process. And it does take some time, especially if you've really created some deep grooves in the brain it's almost like we can see these highways or imprints in the brain. You've been wiring and firing certain thoughts for years and years and years. Time to start to shift it. And another piece of this too is I think a lot of people, they have tried everything and they're doing everything right. And they might even be in a really good place in terms of finally feeling like, okay, this new pro-metabolic, mineral-rich way of eating, this actually feels pretty good. But they still have all of these habits and basically triggers that create that state of panic that could be worked on to maybe make that healing process more enjoyable, a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more easy.
I find too, and I don't know if you see this with your clients, but especially with women, when they start eating enough food and like getting a variety and balancing their meals, they have more energy to recognize all the stuff that's going on in their head. And it can bring up a lot on your healing journey.
That is such an important point, because brain function requires nourishment. And a lot of these restrictive diets, even if it's, cutting out a macronutrient or just being way too calorically limited, it's no surprise that anxiety, panic, overwhelm, inability to make decisions is what we see time and time again, because the brain's literally shutting down. I see that as an amazing cry for help of, okay, we need to really boost your vital nutrients. I mean, some of the things that I think really overlooked in the world of mental health and mental illness. Time and time again, someone's diagnosed with depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder, and really their body's just nutrient deficient.
And it's our bodies trying to compensate. Like you said, our bodies want to be well, they want to heal, they want to be in balance, and they're constantly compensating based on like what we're eating, what we're doing throughout the day, how much sleep we're getting, all these different things. They're just constantly compensating, trying to keep us healthy and alive. So it's just interesting. I tend to see that a lot in women that maybe they're like, oh, like I feel like all this stuff from my childhood is like starting to come up now. And like, yeah, because you have the energy to deal with it now.
Yes. And the body feels safe enough to finally look at what's there, because I think part of that dissociation and the way we package away trauma is the body wisely says, I don't have the energy to deal with this, in the same way that when life's overwhelming, it's like, I don't have the energy to deal with this. So it's a good sign when things are finally coming to the surface. It's like, I guess sometimes I even see acne as a really good sign. I'm like, ooh, wonderful. Your body's pushing stuff out. Great. We don't want to keep that tucked away. We don't want to keep that, stored in the fat cells somewhere, creating all sorts of inflammatory conditions. Awesome. It might not be the most comfortable to deal with, but better out than in.
That's better out than in. I love that. I'm going to use that when someone struggles with acne next. I'll be like, listen to this podcast I did with Theresa. Because that is really challenging. And a lot of women experience acne on their healing journey. And they always want to pinpoint, is it hormonal? Is it based on my gut health, stress related? And it's like, it's probably all of them, and inflammation related. And so it's like, sometimes you have to let it take its course, which is not always easy.
You just reminded me too, this idea, that's a perfect opportunity to rewire a thought, because say in the past, you see your acne and you feel so ashamed, you maybe start to figure out or try to find a way to fix it. Maybe you're scared to go out because you're scared people are going to judge you, and you just feel all of that negativity spiraling. That's your cue to think about, okay, well, what if this acne is here to help me? What if this is a sign that my body is healing? What if this is a sign that, yes, I'm in a healing phase and I'm still learning to balance my hormones. I'm still learning to balance my stress. My liver clearly needs a lot of work. My gut still needs a lot of work. And this is a sign that I'm on a journey, and what would it do for me to show up with a sense of confidence and a sense of trust in my body and a sense of love for my body as it's healing? And, that could completely change, again, that physiological response. If all of a sudden we're like, yes, body, you're doing great, get that shit out. And just letting that change how we show up for our lives.
And then it's like the acne goes away. Hey, Amanda here, just giving you a quick break, hopefully a break for your brain in the middle of this podcast episode, to remind you that if you haven't gone through our free training, Optimizing Hormone Health Through Mineral Balance, we really do recommend starting there. And the main reason for that is because you're going to hear us say things like mineral foundation, having a solid foundation. Are you putting the foundations in place? Especially as we get deeper and deeper into different hormonal topics and specific imbalances in the body, the mineral foundation is always going to be so essential. So if you haven't watched the free training, you can find it in our show notes, or you can go to hormonehealingrd.com and it's going to be right on that front page there. But we really recommend starting there so that you can understand how is your current mineral status, how do you assess this, and how to get started with all that, just so you can get as much as you possibly can out of the rest of the podcast episodes. But that's it. I hope you enjoy the rest of this episode.
It's amazing what happens just by thinking about if the liver is handling and processing so many of the stress hormones that we're creating, and it's busy trying to detoxify estrogen and endotoxin and the mold that we're accidentally breathing in from the air conditioner that we don't even know is releasing mold, all the things. If we can take out a significant load of work for the body, who knows? It might be the thing that's just tipping the bucket or overflowing the bucket.
And one thing that we kind of were touching on that you actually talk about on your Instagram quite a bit is trauma. And I feel like this is a tricky one because not everyone feels that they relate to this. But I think the more you learn about what is trauma, and I love how you have one post that breaks down capital T trauma versus micro trauma. So can you talk about how you define trauma and then how it can differ from person to person?
Yeah, really good question. I think we're starting to realize it's so much less about the actual event. It doesn't have to necessarily be, a traumatic car accident or a sexual assault experience or your parent dying when you're young. Yes, those leave a mark on the body, but we forget that just reacting to a certain situation can shift the brain. It basically heightens the fear centers of the brain. And we might not even realize that we have reacted in the past or that we are reacting, say to even our diet plan or something like that, something that's so insignificant that we don't realize that the body is stuck in this state of fight or flight. So I think when people start to realize that it is so much less about the event and much more about what happened internally, it almost takes the pressure off, because again, a lot of people are like, my life is perfect. I've had supportive parents. I have a wonderful partner. I have access to resources. I live in a beautiful home. And then you start to ask them more questions and you realize that there are so many factors that could have been interpreted as traumatic to the nervous system that might be exacerbating their current state of health. And just seeing that, it just provides a sense of freedom, realizing, whoa, it's not about working harder. It's not about doing more. It's not about finding the next protocol. It's about really honoring that, your nervous system could use some support. And thank goodness you're nourishing yourself, because it's going to work so much better. The body is going to be able to handle so much more stress. Even just having balanced blood sugar completely changes the way the body responds to micro stressors.
I think the biggest takeaway of the whole trauma thing is that even if you don't necessarily feel like you had any really big traumas or even little ones, it's the reaction. When I read your post, I was like, oof, okay, it's not necessarily the thing. It's not about the thing or what happened. It's about how your body responded to it. And then how that could still be hanging around.
A wonderful example is the medical trauma I see a lot of clients coming to me with, and I'm sure you do too, where maybe they got that diagnosis, they were diagnosed with PCOS, or they were diagnosed with early onset ovarian failure, or whatever it is. That alone could create this feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm not safe. Oh my gosh, I'm sick. Oh my gosh, I'm broken. What's the rest of my life going to look like? Boom, 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 boom. That alone can change the functioning of our system. So it's, and I never want to bring something up like this and re-traumatize someone where all of a sudden someone's like, oh my gosh, yes, this is exactly, all the things I've done, all the things I've experienced have created this illness. It's much more about this empowered approach of, you're a human having a human experience. Life throws all sorts of experiences at us. It is challenging in a lot of ways to be a human, and honoring yourself in that process, realizing, okay, even if you have been through something significant or seemingly insignificant that felt significant to your body, there is a way forward. And we really have to notice how that event, how that situation, how that experience impacted you, and what we can do to start to transform it, shift it, appreciate it, learn from it. So many different ways to move through it.
And I think too, it is really nice because sometimes it just gives you that permission to give yourself a little grace of like, okay, so I have been through a lot. Like I have clients that have suffered with things like endometriosis, chronic pain for decades, for decades. And they're like, why am I not healing as quick as like maybe if they're in a group, it's like the other women in the group, or how come it's been a year and I'm still like just starting to see progress. And a lot of it does go back to that you've been in the fight or flight mode for the majority of your life. We have to give your body some space.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure you see a lot of people with pretty intense food sensitivities and like even that maybe diagnosable, say they got some kind of lab test done showing their food sensitivities. But oftentimes it's because they've been in that state of panic, fight, flight, freeze, collapse, whatever stage they're showing up as in the stress response. And then everything they put in the body is then labeled as, oop, this is a foreign invader. This is dangerous. So it is honoring, okay, yes, this is not your fault and we still have to do something about it, but you get to do something about it. That's a wonderful shift as well, because with the victim mentality that, again, no shame, it can sometimes feel like, why me? Like, why is life doing this to me? But even starting to see that as this is my opportunity to actually live a life that's healthy, to actually fully nourish myself so that I can age well, to prioritize taking care of this wonderful body so that I can enjoy my life, so that I can soak in the beauty of the world around me, so that I can help other people, so that I can leave an imprint on this world. You can just really expand. And it's not forcing that positivity. It's really kind of looking at, okay, what matters to you here? What are the thoughts that feel more in alignment with who you actually want to be, how you want other people to feel when they're around you? And knowing that you're not stuck too, even if you've been dealing with pain for 20, 30 years, you're not stuck there.
I think that's the other big thing is like, well, how does this trauma or the response to that trauma impact someone's nervous system and the rest of their body? Like how you talked about the food sensitivities, which I'm so happy you mentioned that because I get a lot of messages about food sensitivities. So I think that's a great example, but like how can someone kind of expect that to show up in their body?
Yeah, great question. I think reactivity in all of the ways. So whether that's food, sound, light, the one I see time and time again is just really disturbed sleep patterns, which can sometimes be just the nervous system loses its ability to regulate. And it takes metabolic energy to relax. So a lot of people are burning through their energy in other ways, maybe just trying to keep their bodies alive. Their body is wisely putting energy where it needs to go. And, they're losing the ability to sleep. But it could be something simple as like all of the autoimmune diagnoses I see. Oftentimes, if you start to talk to people, there is a history of significant and prolonged stress. And it's not to say that the body is confused. I think the body knows exactly what it's doing, but it's just showing up as a less than ideal circumstance where the body is not feeling safe. And it's starting to try and create safety, which might mean attacking its own tissues. And I know there are tons of different theories on this, so that's just a piece of it.
I don't think we can ignore that stress theory, though. So much more research has come out, and it's especially when you look at case studies and stuff, there has to be a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And Amanda, you write beautifully on this, but also the idea that just being in that stress state, we're burning through minerals at such a fast rate. And those minerals are what allow us to create energy, to repair, to detoxify, to build hormones. So many things rely on something as simple as like copper and magnesium. So if we are so stressed out, if we're under eating, if we're panicked about under eating, if we're, locked in that cycle, we're unintentionally digging a hole and creating more of this state of confusion. It's a state of confusion where the body's like, this is not right. It knows it's not right. You know it's not right based off of the way you feel. But there's just so much misinformation out there in terms of how to take that step towards health.
I always say compensation, because that's literally what you're same thing, autoimmune disorder, reflux, like bloating, gut issues, all those things, like your body's compensating.
I think we both get a ton of questions like, help, my hair is falling out. What do I do? And even that, I'm like, well, this is a good sign because your body's letting you know right away that it needs some love. It needs some help. Just starting to look at, if you think about the metrics, the true metrics of health, an image comes to mind of like strength, calm, a robust libido, sleeping well, the ability to play, the ability to think critically, to change your mind, the desire to explore, the desire for new experiences, wanting connection, wanting alone time, like this fluid way of being a human. So I think whenever there's a disruption in that, that's oftentimes where we can start to look at, okay, well, what is going on the stress level? How do you even feel about your life? Are you even aware that there's maybe something that could be shifted or improved? Because some people, again, the awareness needs to be that first place to even reconnect with the body to even know, okay, are you bloated? What does it feel like down there? Not to get over focused on that sensation, but a lot of the normal symptoms we see these days, like painful periods, mood swings, energy dips, rashes, bloating is a big one. Like bloating comes up in almost every conversation for me.
Constipation. I see that all the time.
Yep, absolutely. Those are the wonderful cues. We can thank the body and say, oh my goodness, thank you for letting us know that it's time to change what we've been doing and change the way we've been doing things.
It's hard because then we want to hyper focus on fixing that symptom when in reality, it's like, this is communication. We have to take this information in from our body because it doesn't have any other way to communicate with us.
I'm glad you said it that way too, because so many of the personalities that I know we both talk to are, how can I fix this? How can I do it now? I need to heal this right away. And it's kind of that type A, like the only way to get through this is to do more, work more, figure out more, research more, be more diligent, when that might be one of the core patterns that could use some attention. Because what if what we know about the body being in that parasympathetic, healing, restorative state, what if that's actually doing less? What if that's actually taking a break from being so diligent about certain things and maybe giving yourself, like you said, that grace to say, okay, my body's speaking to me. Thank goodness. Now is my time to master the art of relaxation, to master the art of not scrolling on my phone and learn to be okay with not feeling okay. There's so many different ways to look at what that shift might look like for someone.
I'm still thinking about how you said it requires energy to relax and to get that relaxed state. I'm like, oh, that one's going to stick with me for a really long time, I think.
Yeah. I started to dive into this when I was reading a lot of Ray Peat's work, but he was the first person to explain that in a way that really clicked. And he was even explaining how, kids that are diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, when they give the cell and the nerves the proper environment to function with a stimulant, it actually allows them to calm down. So again, it's this idea of there's nothing wrong with that child. It's their body's lacking something. And that's why we see a lot of people actually sleeping so much more deeply through the night when they have a pretty hefty snack right before bed and they've been eating consistently throughout the day, because the body has that metabolic energy to continue a lot of the functions that need to happen while we're sleeping. And it's not, woken up with a drop in blood sugar and then a surge in stress hormones. So
I feel like most of the women that I work with, they have a really hard time not doing. They're always doing, going. Like when they actively try to okay, I'm going to put boundaries around my phone, screens. I'm going to try to make more time for myself. It's extremely difficult. And coming from that mindset of well, this requires energy. So just like we try to pack as much as we possibly can into our days and get it all done, it's like we actually have to take some of that energy to relax.
Yeah. And you just reminded me too, the ability for, say, the nerves or the tissues in the colon to relax. That requires minerals like magnesium to have that softening effect, contracting with something like calcium. But, we need food, fuel, to relax, to release, and even to repair. If we think about healing the gut, it doesn't happen in a fasted state. So I'm glad that people are starting to realize, whoa, actually it's nourishment that allows the gut lining to heal. It's eating more of certain nutrients and, yes, staying in that resting state that allows the gut to heal. It's not about removing and juicing and fasting and cleansing and detoxing. It's more about building and letting the body feel safe with energy.
And, you don't need a 2-hour morning and nighttime routine doing all the things checking off your list in order to heal your body. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. I mean, talk about a way to stress yourself out. If it's thinking about, I have to do my castor oil pack, and then I have to dry brush, and then I have to go on my rebounder, and then I have to do my red light. And people feel so overwhelmed versus what's the least you could do? What's the easiest thing you could do tonight? And that's when I hear people come back and they're like, I had ice cream and I fell asleep and I feel amazing,
One kind of concept, I really like how you talk about it. And I think a lot of people probably aren't super familiar with it, that I want to dig into is how you talk about our limbic system loop and how to release this 3F loop. So can you talk about what is our limbic system loop? What are these loops, and how can they kind of create that wall of that we hit when healing?
Yeah, you ask such good questions. Just have to say that. But the limbic system is basically the more primitive regions, refers to the more primitive regions of the brain that have evolved to keep us safe. So those are the panic regions of the fight, flight, freeze mode, where if there's a threat, if there's something that feels dangerous, those regions light up. Our ability to critically think, more of the prefrontal area of the brain, shut down, and most of the blood flow actually shifts towards the more primitive regions. So if someone, say, got a diagnosis of PCOS 10 years ago and they've been in fight or flight or whatever kind of panic mode perpetually, those limbic older regions of the brain basically stay hyperactive, and it literally changes the way we start to think. So the 3F loop is something I refer to when people are future forecasting fatigue, something I mentioned earlier. But it's basically any of those protective loops that the brain gets stuck in as a result of being hyper stressed, as a result of being sick. I mean, even gut inflammation, for example, can send signals up the vagus nerve to the brainstem, and it sends off those alarm bells. So these limbic loops could be something like we become hyper attuned to scanning for danger within the body, scanning for discomfort. We might assume we're going to be tired. Let's see, that's the classic future forecasting that I see time and time again. We see negativity biases as part of that limbic loop, where we just assume the worst case scenario is going to happen, which fatigue is a part of that, but just assuming that it's not going to work out. I'm not going to heal. I'm going to be sick forever. My body's letting me down. Those types of spirals.
Pain. Do you see a lot of chronic pain people?
Yes. Pain and heightened awareness of that pain. Again, the brain basically becomes so attuned and hyper vigilant to noticing, ooh, my knee hurts, my joints hurt. Oh my gosh. And the spirals from there. So it's basically a limbic loop is any pathway that comes from a good place. The body's trying to avoid further harm. It's trying to avoid further discomfort. And it becomes disproportionately focused on avoiding that harm. So when the brain rewiring comes in is starting to notice, okay, well, if this is the cycle you're in right now, how can we shift that? And sometimes it's doing the opposite, literally looking at the loop that we're stuck in and doing the opposite, starting to engage these regions of the brain again. And that's one of the reasons why I love tapping so much as a tool, because research is showing that the tapping points actively lower the activation in the amygdala, the fear center of the brain, which I think is amazing, because we have other ways of doing this too, but there's something really, really special about hitting the acupressure points. And even cooler, I get really excited about this, but even without saying any of the phrases to actually rewire, even just hitting the points, and I know people can't see this, but even just hitting the acupressure points, tapping under my eyes right now, just hitting those points, and we're not hitting them, we're tapping them, starts to lower the reactivity in the fear centers and starts to calm the nervous system. And we can measure this. We see dips in cortisol levels. We see heart rate variability improve. We see inflammation markers start to improve. It's pretty amazing how something as simple as touch can start to shift it. And then the phrases that we get to add on in tapping sequences, I think, kind of seal the deal, because it gives the brain a blueprint of where to go. Because once we're stuck in a limbic loop, it's like, this is all I know. I'm just an anxious person. I'm just sick. I'm da 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 da. Oh, thank you for reminding me. Just talking out loud reminded me. One of the biggest limbic loops that I see is that just the idea that, my body's sick. I'm just broken. So then the body's like, you're right. I'm sick and I'm broken. Let's collect all the data points to confirm that. If we start to teach the body that actually, what would the healthy version of me do? What would a healthy person do in this situation? And starting to almost act as if that were true, not to bright side, not to pretend, but it's almost like just getting curious about, okay, what happens? And oftentimes people notice, wow, they stand up taller. They act differently. They might be more animated. They might be smiling more. All of these things that the healthy version of them would do. And then it starts to lock in because the body gets a glimpse of that and it wants more.
And the whole reason I brought up this like limbic loop thing that people are probably like, why are we, why do I need to know this about my brain, is when in the beginning, it is essentially what you were talking about, right? Like we get into these spirals, our brain completely masters this art, like you say in your post, of assuming the worst case scenario. And I think so many people can relate to that. But the whole point that I wanted you to get across, and I think you did beautifully, is that this happens to our brains, right? It is a protective mechanism, and it's just another example of our bodies trying to protect us, trying to do things for us. And I think if we can look at that whole healing journey when things come up, like if you feel like, oh my gosh, I definitely I'm in that loop completely of like, and it could be negativity, could be fatigue, could be like fear around symptoms, whatever it is for you, knowing that, oh, I actually can like retrain my brain to think differently. And then that could completely shift where you're at in your healing journey.
Yes. And you nailed it. It's not like I'm sick and I see the world this way. That might've been how it started, but oftentimes it's that limbic loop that's keeping the body sick, because it basically keeps the body inflamed. And then from there, the body isn't able to repair. It isn't able to shift back into that normal state of homeostasis where we're building and releasing and doing all the things we hope we doing all the things that a body wants to do. So I think for a lot of people that have been sick for a while, that sometimes is exactly like the reset they need to give their body a chance to heal.
And sometimes people just, I feel like if you have that type A personality, or like whatever, however you want to describe it, like very ambitious people, very like productive people that want to get things done, fix it and move on. I do think it's helpful for them too, because I feel like you tend to get in that mindset of like, what's the problem? Can I fix it? What can I do to fix it? And then when those things don't work, it just creates this like fear and like stress within the body.
Yeah, I keep pointing to that limbic region, but that's exactly it. It's like the brain just gathers more evidence, like, see, I relaxed and things got worse, or, and it just collects more and more data versus, okay, what's the opposite of what I've been doing? If my state of dysfunction has changed my brain and it's furthering my disease, can I change my brain to go in the opposite direction and almost it like starts to transform the picture of disease or the picture of symptoms too, because we can even train to the point of seeing all symptoms as good signs, as an excuse to really rest, to get excited to rest, to get excited to live differently, because we could keep living at that crazy fast pace, go, 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 fix, 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 do, do, do. But I think a lot of people realize too late in life that, oh my gosh, they live in such a way that just isn't fulfilling. It doesn't feel meaningful. And they're maybe at the point of retirement or later in life and health issue comes up or it gets worse. And that's normally their cue. And one of the things I like to remind people of is you don't need to wait until that point. You can really start to live in a way that feels so meaningful, so juicy to you right now, that everything is worth it, even while you're healing, especially while you're healing. If anything, that's your little cue right there to say, okay, yep, I got to really enjoy this life because it's going by very quickly.
I love that. Juicy living. We'll end with this because I know I have to let you go, but can you talk about like what EFT or tapping is, and then how you help people and use it within your practice and your membership?
Yeah, I guess we didn't explain that, or I didn't explain that, but
you kind of did. You kind of brought it up. I was like, let's just really get into it because I feel like some people know and like some people probably have no idea.
The emotional freedom technique is what most people refer to it as, or just tapping in general. And there's so many different branches of this, but it's basically the idea that by lowering the stress reactivity in the brain with specific tapping points. And if you watch a video, you can easily Google, or you can check out some of my free videos. We're going along a series of pressure points while basically acknowledging the symptoms, acknowledging the fear, the panic, the worry, the overwhelm, even the meaning of that, of, oh my gosh, I've been sick for so long. I'll never be able to have kids. I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. All of the stories that build from those symptoms, by acknowledging those, counterintuitively, it starts to deactivate them in the brain. It's almost like the brain finally is able to release the charge of that emotion. And then as the sequence continues, you basically get to start to shift and lead your nervous system towards the thoughts that you do want to be thinking. So again, it's not about that. It's not about bright siding or just saying affirmations over and over again, or just thinking better. It's about literally honoring where you're at, what this means for you, and the smallest step forward for you so that your nervous system can safely take that too. Because sometimes if we change things too quickly, the nervous system says, another stressor. Yeah, I use tapping as my primary tool with the most complicated cases that have literally tried everything. They've maybe even tried EMDR, DNRS, other brain rewiring tools that just haven't worked. And time again, it's like, for some people, it's just like it clicks. It was for me. And I know I didn't really get into that very much, but that was part of regaining hope for me when I realized, whoa, it's way easier to just acknowledge that, yes, I'm scared, that I feel overwhelmed, that I feel so paralyzed in life. Oh, and by acknowledging this, then I can actually move forward wisely and peacefully, as opposed to just pretending it's not happening or wishing it weren't happening. So it can be used for anything from fear of symptoms, overwhelm of symptoms, anxiety, self-consciousness, fear of judgment. I mean, a lot of people use it for like weight loss, or just dealing with body image issues, appetite issues, insomnia. The list basically goes on in terms of whatever it is that's coming up for someone that might be adding to that stress load. That's where tapping comes in. It's acknowledging and shifting.
And I feel like that's the part of healing that isn't always addressed. We're not sometimes, I feel like my clients share a lot of things with me. So I do feel like maybe they're getting some of that out, but getting it out, stimulating different parts of your brain during that, in your nervous system throughout that process to like retrain that and make it less powerful is huge.
Yes, that's a big point of it too, because there's something so cathartic about talk therapy, or even just someone you love. Hey, I'm having a really hard day, or wow, I'm so overwhelmed, or oh my gosh, I'm so stressed, or wow, my belly hurts again, all these things. But in a way that continues fueling the same panic loops. So there is something kind of amazing about tapping, in that it allows the brain to say, well, and so what? And I'm going to do this anyways. And it breaks those stuck patterns. So absolutely. It's very, it allows for that shift. It really opens up the space to shift, as opposed to just trying to shift and it's not working.
And if people are listening to this and are like, what the heck is this sequence? What is this? Where am I tapping on my body? Theresa has a YouTube channel that it's on her Instagram too, the IGTV. But if you prefer, I feel like they're so beautiful and nice and big and stuff on YouTube. So if you want to check them out, I'm going to link both her Instagram and her YouTube channel in the show notes, right in the description of this video. And you can go watch those and just get a feel for like, what is a tapping sequence and how, like, what does it look like? What do I actually have to do? What do I say? Because you really do walk through exactly what to do during it. And it's basically just like you do it with you as you're going through everything.
Yeah, exactly. And I was so skeptical at first until it started working for me, and different tapping practitioners have different styles. So it's worth trying out different people and also really honoring, okay, well, what do I really want to work on? So the more detailed the sequence is, the more focused it is to you, the more effective it is, because the brain, there's something to be said about using even your own language. That's why I just love this tool so much, because it's basically completely open to you to use as you want. Like I even have some people using it in their car on their way to work or at a stop sign. They'll just take some time to tap on something. So
I love that. It's like kind of, like any other practice, breath work, whatever it is, it's like you need a second, you can tap into that literally and give yourself that space to calm down. Look for specific videos. Like on your Instagram, you have them, YouTube, they're like 4 different things. So I would say try to find the specific thing, symptom, whatever that you're trying to work on, and go through that sequence if you can. If you're in the Master Your Minerals course, I know a lot of you listening to this are, she actually made a video for us inside the course. It's under the healing journey section, and it's specifically meant to help you with kind of dealing with that whole process. And then lastly, Theresa, when did you launch the membership?
Yeah, a couple months ago. Yeah, it feels like my baby in a lot of ways, but I add to it every single week based off of requests. We add a new video every Friday, sometimes Saturday if we have some IT issues, but that's been fun because I love to have people in mind when I'm making a sequence to make it that much more effective. Just really knowing, okay, what's going on in their brain? Okay, let's shift it. So there's basically everything for PMS, fear of not sleeping, PTSD, panic attacks, bloating, flare-ups. Really, I try to just keep expanding the library. So that's been really fun. And it's the most important piece of it, I think, is there's a community aspect to it as well. I think it's good to know that you're not alone and that so many other people are working on healing, and knowing that you kind of get to do it together. I firmly believe that we all do better when we all do better. I say this all the time with my husband, but truly, we all do better when we all do better. So just by you starting to work on yourself, you're going to have ripple effects. You're going to be creating ripple effects for the rest of the world. People will notice. It's like, think of the time you go to the grocery store and you just see someone and you're like, wow, there's something about them. They just have this sparkle, this like magnetism. Realizing that you can be doing that for the world too. You can show up differently for the world. And how great is that that there are hundreds of other people doing the same.
One other thing that you offer, like definitely check out the membership. I just love that it's so accessible. It's a really reasonable price point. I think most people could probably handle that. And then if you do want something a little bit more like personal, obviously you work one-on-one, but you do have those group classes where you do those sequences too, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I honor that financially. Looks different for people right now. So I offer a range. And again, the group calls are fun because it is good to share. And even some of the tapping studies show that even just watching someone else tap, even if it's something that you're not dealing with, an issue that you're not working on, still has that calming and regulating effect on the nervous system, which I think is fascinating. I mean, that comes back to more of like the mirror neuron side of things. But yeah, those are great. And I choose a different topic every single month based off of what I get the most questions about in my DM. So that's been kind of fun just to see the similarities and letting it serve as a reminder that you're absolutely not alone, because it can feel isolating to be healing, to be seeking answers, to even be trying to heal and not getting better in the ways that you want to. So good to know that you get to have support, that you can share some of that and work together to find what works.
I love it. And I love that you have the range of offerings and that you were able to create the Tapping with Tea membership. I think it's going to be, it already is really special, but I do think it's going to be a really great resource that I know, I forget who I was talking to, but I was like, this is a cool thing for practitioners to have as a resource for people too. Because not everyone, if you're working one-on-one or in a group, you can't always afford to work with another practitioner. So it's a really great resource.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, I'm personally excited about it. And sometimes I even use it, which I didn't think I would, because I've actually I've stopped tapping personally because I feel like I'm in a really good place. But sometimes I'm like, I could use a little boost right now, and just, I'll do one for just something simple. And it's amazing how simple it is. And, it's kind of funny watching myself, but it works.
I feel like you're a very calming person. So I can imagine, like, when you said the mirror neuron thing, I'm like, I could totally picture people like doing the group classes or doing the membership. And even if they don't feel comfortable tapping right away, they do still get benefit.
That's how I know this works for me, at least. And I always tell people, like, if you don't believe it's going to work, just try it and see. Your body's not going to lie. Most people get a pretty profound relaxation response right away. They're yawning, they feel kind of floaty. But I used to be such a psycho. I was a completely different person. I was so stressed out, so panicked. I was, like I said before, just no one you'd want to be around, And now I feel like a completely new woman. I find myself just laughing at most things and feel like playfulness is my predominant mode of being, which I wouldn't have believed would be possible given where I was at during my sickest days. So it's good to even just notice, whoa, what does this do for me? How does this work? And if it does work, get after it.
I think that playfulness being the predominant feeling is my new life goal. Like, I think that's a really good thing to kind of strive for, because it is easy to like let things upset you, to overreact to different things. And imagine what life would be like if you had a playful reaction to most things.
Yeah, especially looking down at, I was going to say your belly, but your own belly. Say you deal with significant bloating as you're trying to heal. When I started making jokes about it, kind of treating it like a baby and like, saying like, here's Jessica again, when my belly would be completely distended. Again, such a different experience. I was actually having fun. It was turning into a comedic routine with my husband, something that I wouldn't think would be possible until it was.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I hope people connect with this and feel hope after listening, and curiosity, because I think that's one of the coolest things about your posts on Instagram. I often will share them with people, is like they do spark that sense of curiosity of like, what is possible? Like, maybe this is like the limbic loop thing. I remember reading that and be like, wow, that's powerful to really try to recognize it in yourself. So thank you for everything that you do, all the free tapping videos you make, the content that you share, and for coming on here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Amanda. This has been fun, really fun.
Thank you for listening to the Are You Menstrual podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a review and sharing the podcast with someone you think it will help. If you are new here, we can't recommend enough to start with our mineral imbalance quiz. This is going to give you an idea if you are at low, moderate, or high risk for mineral imbalances. And then, of course, make sure you follow us on Instagram at Hormone Healing RD, and consider signing up for our newsletter. If you like nerding out and you are just loving these podcasts, but maybe you're a little bit more visual and you want to see things too, we go into a ton of detail in our weekly newsletter. So we would love to have you join us there. All right, thank you, and we will see you in the next episode.